next presenter, Neal Erickson, lives in a small community called Uma Uma on the Big Island in Hawaii. We think Neal is an architect, but he runs an accommodation business, kind of like the official AML accommodation in the Pacific. He models in several scales, but for the curious, he works it all with dead rail. Neal, we would love to hear why you decided not to run two DCC wires all over your layout.
Garrett, I have wires all over my layout because I intend to run DCC. In fact, even my dead rail locomotives have DCC. But I didn't want to talk about that until I talked about how I design my layout and why. So if I can take a moment, let me start off by saying all of the discussions earlier today make me feel wholly inadequate to do this because my soldering is nowhere near as good as Kevin Marks, and I haven't weathered a damn thing. Well, that's not entirely true, but I'll get back to it. My interest in railroads in many scales has been in HO primarily for 40 years. In 2010, the allure of ON30 just became too strong. And I started looking at my community for ideas for modeling an ON30 railroad or a narrow gauge railroad. And obviously the idea of modeling a plantation railroad was really strong. So I went ahead and built a layout. But as I learned more about our islands and our history, it occurred to me that the Oahu Railway and Land Company was more the kind of railroad I wanted to model. It's a common carrier. It ran for nearly 100 miles around the island of Oahu. I think it was more like 70 miles, but it had really cool little narrow gauge engines, you know, K28s, C16s, 260s. And these are the kind of things I enjoy modeling. And one of the questions that came up earlier is, you know, you need to model what you enjoy. And I enjoy building models. I enjoy watching my trains run through my scenery and my models. I like watching those. I do occasionally enjoy switching. And so the idea of creating a layout that incorporated some of the ideas and the allure of the tropical islands of Hawaii, and in particular Oahu, was very strong. So let me start off by saying I learned a little bit about the Oahu Railway because just living in Hawaii, like anywhere, you are fascinated with its history. And I'll get into that a little bit. But basically, there was a railway that started and was chartered in 1888 by a guy named Benjamin Franklin Dillingham, who got a charter to build a railway basically out into the middle of nowhere. And at the time, this is, 1880s was a very volatile period in our history. And by 1889, he was open and running all the way from Oahu out to Waipahu, which is the area that I'm really interested in. But before I jump too far along, let me just tell you a little bit about Hawaii. Hawaii is an archipelago, and the major islands shown here are the bigger ones. Of course, it goes on another 1,000 miles off into the Pacific, but I live on the big island, the Hawaii island, on the bottom right-hand of the screen, and more toward the east side of the island, facing northeast. I wish I had a little pointer. But above me, Maui, Molokai, and then Oahu is where the Oahu Railway and Land Company was built. Oahu is also where our capital city is of Honolulu. And by comparison, Oahu has, I would say, over 1 million occupants today. So that's about 43 people per acre. The Big Island, by contrast, is very big. It can combine all the other islands together on our island. And there's probably one person has maybe 43 acres. And it was fascinating because it had a standard gauge railway, which I did model at one time in HO standard gauge. But the allure of narrow gauge and the allure of ON30 got me looking closer. Oh, too far. Or Oahu, and is really quite small, actually. And if you look at the bottom lower right-hand corner, you'll see Honolulu and the rail line traversing around Pearl Harbor up along the coast, known as the Waianae Coast, and all the way out to the right, left-hand side, Kaena Point, where it was a very famous, beautiful spot that the railroad would stop and people would get off and take photographs. It would continue on around the coast down toward Haleiwa, which is hard to see on the map, but Dillingham built a hotel there, and it became very famous. Presidents and kings, people of stature would go stay there. But you could ride an excursion train from Honolulu out to Haleiwa, and they'd turn the train and go back. I think it was $2.50, included a meal. The railroad continued on all the way to Kahuku, and that was a sugar plantation. And it never did continue any further than that. What was interesting about this railroad, in my mind, is that it was a common carrier. It wasn't just a sugar plantation line, although it did serve a lot of the plantations. Basically, it was taking, boxcars of sugar from the plantations and running them down to Honolulu to the port. And then later, in the early 1900s, they ran a spur from the town I mentioned earlier, Waipahu, up toward the center of the island, Wahiawa, or Wahiawa. Wahiawa means the people who live in the valley. And the mountains form a valley through there, a low spot where I've actually bicycled across many times. And it goes all the way up from Waipahu, where you'll see in the middle near Pearl City, up and across over to Haleiwa, where the hotel used to be. And today you can't go around Kaena Point. It's no longer traversable, but you can travel all the way up along the Waianae coast, and it becomes, frankly, quite wild out there. It's beautiful and wild and very windy, and gets more so out toward the point. Trying to decide what to model of this has been a challenge, because there's so many beautiful and really cool scenes. I mean, the station before 1922 was really quite classic. Beautiful in the upper hand, left hand of the screen there. I wouldn't say it's an architectural wonder, not like it is today, but it's amazing structure it was. And you can see the dress in the period. That appeals to me. I like that kind of idea of maybe a simpler life. I wouldn't say a golden age, certainly not. But if you look to the right, you look at it a little closely, and this is the station of Aiea. And it was one of several stations that had a real family appearance. And Aiea was kind of on the water. If you look to the right, it was right on Pearl Harbor. Right across from the tracks was Pearl Harbor and the bay. And it was really, in my mind, a real romantic kind of notion of going out through there. By the way, the railway was double-tracked all the way out to Waipahu by 1920s. In the lower left-hand corner, again, this romantic notion of traveling through the taro and rice fields. Ironically, no sugar, but it was low wetland area because most of the railroad was built on pilings and then backfilled using coral. The middle picture on the bottom is actually Waipahu, taken on a bridge looking at the private car toward the station. And on the right-hand side were two buildings. One is a Japanese store, and across from that was a Chinese store. And up above were living spaces. And I'll get back to that because that was really important in my decision to kind of model this area. And I love the station on the right, which is the Pearl City station. This is just, I don't know, unique. It was really cool. So the more I looked at the line, the more I became attracted to it, more of as a romantic note. And right, this photograph again on the left of the single track running through the taro fields. And of course, palm trees are ubiquitous, and you can imagine, I don't build many pine trees, but I've been building palm trees ad nauseum. So Ron, you can help me do some palm trees and I'll do some pine trees. On the right, the double track, and you can see the coral ballast and the fill material running again past the taro. And if you look beyond a little bit, you can kind of imagine the rice fields and the water down there. On the right-hand side, up toward the mountain, was mostly sugarcane. So I started to focus in on Waipahu, and I found some really great photographs like this one looking from the other direction toward the station and the little freight house there. And I love this enclosed water tank. What's the point in Hawaii? I mean, the water is not going to freeze, but I don't know. It's pretty neat. And then I have no idea what that huge warehouse is. It must have had to do something with the warehouse or the sugar industry, but it wasn't served by the rail, as far as I can tell. So just beyond this point, there was a Y. And so the Y would go from Waipahu and then, like I said, up toward the valley, the Wahiawa, and where the pineapple fields were. I really love the idea that the mainline trains would stop and leave cars for the Wahiawa branch. And that would give me an opportunity to run my mainline trains on maybe a partially double tracked area and kind of my parade route. And they would stop and leave cars, which would be picked up and taken up the mountain. In the early 1919 through around 1921, 22, the Wahiawa branch experimented with Shay locomotives. Now, maybe I'm not like anyone else who loves narrow gauge Shay locomotives, but I love narrow gauge Shay locomotives. And I have one I'm going to show you later. But the idea of running Shays up the 4% plus grades into Wahiawa just cinched it for me. Looking at Waipahu, kind of from the left, that last photograph was looking toward the bridge and the warehouses and the two stores there, and you can see the freight house, and the station looks really small by comparison. But the stream is called Kapakahi, which means unlucky. I'm not sure why, but the unlucky stream. And then the bridge, at this point, was prior to it being double tracked to the Y. And the Y would go on to the Waianae coast and all the way around to Haleiwa and eventually to Kahuku. On my layout, would go no further than what you see right here. I'm going to model basically one town. And as I started looking at this, I contacted some guests from the hotel that had said they were from Waipahu, and if I ever was in the area, please give them a call. So I called them, and they said, oh, by all means, come on over. You'll want to meet my auntie because she grew up in one of those stores upstairs. I mean, what an amazing experience to meet someone who remembers the railroad and growing up above the stores. And she was Chinese, but she married a Japanese, and so she grew up in one side of the street and moved over to the other after she was married, which was pretty funny. You're not going to be able to see this. I can barely read it, but it's the whole branch line from the far left of Waipahu Junction up through the ravines and the bridges. And, you know, I wanted to get away from all of the cliches, but honestly, there were a lot of really cool tall bridges that went up this branch line. And it was, again, like I said, at least a 4% grade in many places. And it went off into many different directions, out into the sugarcane fields, out into the pineapple fields. And right in the middle of the screen, it branched up all the way into Schofield Barracks. So if you don't know Schofield, it's an Army Air Force base. And I think Jeff Schultz, who is listening today, might have served up in that area or remember this area. I don't know. But the area that I'm interested in would be right in the center of Wahiawa before it went across the bridge, where a lot of this is a reservoir that served water, that held water for the city of Honolulu. So the area that I was interested in is right where I pointed out in the middle where the reservoir. I'm not going to try to model the bridge, but I do want to model the pineapple spur. They call it the pine spur. And a small yard up there. And then maybe the branch up to Schofield Barracks, which is the one that runs from the word that says Dole that used to be a Y up there, and it would go up into the Air Force Base. Interestingly, a lot of these areas had mules and donkeys, and one of the offsprings of the business that they were able to do was to take manure into town and process it to be used elsewhere. So my layout room is an old hayloft turned into a studio after we moved the horses somewhere else. And I ended up adding some stairs to the outside. Yes, those are pineapple in the foreground. If you've never seen any pineapples, they grow like, well, it's hard to describe. But we have a lot of pineapples. My room up there is actually very odd. And on the right-hand side, I did a little SketchUp version of it. And you can see the walls on the outside are only 4 feet tall and it rises to about 9 feet in the middle. So the useful space is maybe 15 foot square. And I can crawl back in the other areas with, ducking and bending, but it isn't very useful. It isn't very useful for anything except maybe staging and storage, which I decided to do. So sketching up the layout in 1/4 inch scale, I realized really isn't much more room than what you could do with a one-town layout, which is perfectly fine for what I had in mind. The last layout I did, I tried to cram, 10 pounds of flour in a 5-pound sack. So, wow, it's kind of like I threw it over there. On the lower level, on the right-hand side, Waipahu Junction, the photograph depicts it in the 50s when it was looking a little more decrepit, but not terrible. It's kind of cool. I have very few photographs of Waipahu Junction, despite all the people who traveled through there. But you can see in my sketch, I said pineapple? No. I do have pineapples, but bananas are the ones I meant to say. We have bananas out there. Thank you. The sketch shows Waipahu in the center of the space and the siding, and then it would run off into staging representing Honolulu and Pearl City and beyond. And then on the left, it would go down and join that same staging as the Waianae Coast and Kahuku. So really all I'm going to do is model Waipahu Junction, and then in order to gain a little elevation, I had a lot of input on this. I was going to do a single turn, not a spiral, but just a single turn of a helix, similar to what Jack Burgess did for his layout, and I was very much influenced when I got to meet him and visit his layout. The spur will wrap around above and behind Waipahu and along the backdrop somehow. I'm not sure if I'm going to pop it out of the backdrop here and there. You can kind of see it sketched in. And it would rise about a total of 20 inches. Now, Ron said he's had about 18 inches visible between his decks. And I know scale, 18 inches doesn't seem very much. So I'm starting off at about 39 inches, and I'm going to rise up to about 60 inches. So the spiral would curve up across a trestle or a cut. And I don't know if I have any photographs, but the town of Waipahu actually comes up from Waipahu Station up Depot Road to the sugar mill, and maybe I'll show you a photograph of that if I have one. Upper level again is the siding, dole siding, and I don't necessarily show the pine spur per se, but the town of Wahiawa was really important for pineapples. They had a stockyard there, a big supply house for all of the, I assume, for everything that goes on in processing and harvesting pineapples. The station, of course, a freight house, and the cannery. The cannery was a 2-track yard where they would actually ramp across from one car to the other in order to load and unload cans and crates of pineapples. It was very fascinating. In finding photographs of pineapple cars has been a real challenge. I found 2 or 3 on eBay, and I was able to purchase some. So that's been really interesting. So, here it is. This is Depot Road. So on the upper right is the station of Waipahu, which, like I said, it has a family resemblance to Aiea. Below that is the station, looking from the other point of view with the water tower, and the station again looking in around 1921 when they double tracked this. They made a shoe fly around the bridge in order to make a steel bridge, and then the trestle, it was never actually removed to the Y, and it was used for the rest of its life. But on the left, Depot Road gives you a flavor of a town going up to the sugar mill. And there was an article in Model Railroader where it showed how you could use foreshortening and of buildings to you indicate that the distance is further, and I think that's selective compression to a degree, but using a different scale for every building going up the hill. I think in even the very shallow area I have, which is about 4 feet, I think I can give an indication of a town going up the hill. And then somewhere up there, the railroad on my line anyway would cross the road at about 5 inches above the depot road, and that would continue on up to Wahiawa. My railroad, of course, I really love that photograph looking across the bridge. And when I was able to go to Waipahu Bridge across Kapakahi Stream, that bridge is iconic. In all the photographs, that one captured my attention. And you can see I have a little cardboard mock-up of Waipahu Station. I don't have any of the stores mocked up yet, but I wanted to get the main line down and running. And so from here, looking toward Honolulu, it was single track to Waipahu, and it became double track. My layout will only have a siding there. I think it's about 14 feet long. But this was one of the main features I wanted to model. In addition to that, I wanted to have a single line going through rice fields and taro fields along the shoreline, like in Aiea. And then, if you remember in the previous photographs, the order boards and the semaphore signals were used because the whole railroad ran on ABS. I'm not going to get into that so much, but I do hope to replicate some of that. And I found some really fantastic O-scale semaphore and train order board details on shapeways, which I ordered. And I'm looking forward to getting those started with some servos to simulate the bounce and whatnot. So that's going to be really, really fun. On the left, this, I believe, is a pineapple train. Although later in the railroad's career, it could have been the trash train. And they ran huge, long trash trains from Honolulu all the way out to a place called Yokoyama, which was just the name of the landfill. I have no idea why. No offense to anyone named Yokoyama. That's just the name it was. In Wahiawa, the station again had a real similar family appearance to the other two, the Aiea and Waipahu station, although it had these big hip roofs instead of the gable roofs. And it looked like, you know, a family of four could live up there. But these were not really big buildings. So it should be really fun to build a model of that. And then on the lower right is that freight station in Wahiawa. And behind it, somewhere back in there, is the cannery. And that's one of the very few photographs I've found of the cannery. So if anybody has one, please share it. I look forward to that. My previous layout is an example of what I'm trying to create. That feeling of running along the sugarcane out in an area that's a lush tropical area. I was, like everybody else, wanted to have a deep trestle and waterfalls, but just became kind of cliche and I didn't pursue it. So I'm looking to do something that's more prototypical, and I'm hoping I can get there. This has been really fun learning about this, and I did model a small piece of a pineapple field on the left, and it was kind of fun. I have been in touch with a guy, one of the two guys who wrote a book called Next Stop Honolulu, which has become a huge reference. In fact, the very first photograph was from that book with his permission. And he actually is having 3D printed pineapples made, and he offered to send me some. So I'm looking forward to talking more with Jim Chittox, and he is modeling Oahu Railway. More, I am in a giant basement. I think one wall is 80 feet long. He in ON3 and is very passionate about it, and it's very exciting to talk to someone else who's also interested. On the upper right was my mock-up of the Waipahu station in the previous layout. Obviously, I was influenced by the Oahu Railway even back when I was doing a fictitious line named the Uma Uma Railway and Navigation Company, which is where I live, Uma Uma. Why Navigation Company? Because I like the abbreviations UR and N. My wife thought it was cliche to name something urine, but I did find some really cute logos. with never mind. The bottom right hand corner is a photograph I took of a mock-up of the layout I'm building now, and the coral ballast and fill material. It's a little messy, but I don't know. Maybe it's okay. It's always a work in progress. So thank you. I have some dead rail examples. I'm also posting, maybe not so frequently anymore, but I have been posting on the Model Railroad Hobbyist website. It's called the Pine Spur Chronicles. My username there is Nealer for Neal Erickson. And I hope that you'll take advantage of reaching out and asking me any questions about Hawaii or ABS, semaphore signals, or anything else that strikes your fancy. And I have some examples of running dead rail here, and I will switch the camera from my laptop to my cell phone, I guess, so I can show you around. So bear with me a moment, because I think the battery in my dead rail engine died, but we'll see how it goes here. So Marty, if you have anybody with questions, I'm going to transition over here.
There's no one yet. I did remind them.
So, can you see me okay now? I'm about halfway through my time, so I want to make sure if anybody has any questions before I jump in, I'd be more than happy to answer them. All right. I'm going to take my phone and I'll give you kind of a look around here. In fact, I think I'll even leave it on the tripod. Oh, I need to get into the room. Sorry about that. Marty, if you can hear me, I'm knocking at your door. There you go. There you go.
Neal, you need to mute one of the mics.
Thank you. How do I get my microphone is my problem. Huh. Can you hear me at all? No?
You press the button there and it mutes.
So do I have audio now? Oh, terrific. Thank you. So I don't know if there's any questions at this point, but I see if I can show you what I've been doing here. My my Shay, I think I mentioned I love my Shay, and my mock-up of the Waipahu station here. And I'm not sure why I don't have any motion to my dead rail. One of the drawbacks, obviously, to any battery-powered locomotive is the damn battery, right? So I'm going to make sure it's actually working. So I see. I have a sloppy wire. There we are. Yeah, it's not working. So anyway, this locomotive is using a
tsunami decoder, and I believe it's a Tam Valley receiver. The car that fell on the ground is a Bachmann, like many of mine. And this one doesn't have much weight in it. But a lot of mine do have a lot of weight. I like to weight them down so that when you couple, they don't move. And I can actually see the wheels to couple them or put them on the track, which is neat about the scale. So I have a CVP T2 5000 throttle, which is connected to engine number 9, and I can give it a couple of toots, and it will be able to head off here. Let's try to follow it along here. So this is to represent the edge of the shoreline, and that's a giant light fixture in the background, obviously. And this would be representative of somewhere along the coastline. And let me lift this up so you can see a little bit of what's on the other side. I'm hoping to do a little rice field back in there. So they had little walkways about. So, and then again, looking down the coast. Last time I had a layout here, I made up a little plug for the window so I could do a backdrop. And I may still do that, but I kind of like my own view from my desk here. At any rate, while that's running off into the distance, I can take you around to some other points of view here. So a lot of these cars are not necessarily Oahu typical. In fact, they're all lettered for something else. And even the caboose, you might notice, is still lettered for the Oahu Railway and Navigation Company. So this engine is headed to Honolulu in this direction. And ultimately, it will go into the reverse staging loop and come back out. I have it set up right now, so it will just continue around and do a continuous loop, assuming it all works, because I only just soldered the throw bars to the switches yesterday. So there's always some things to figure out. So my desk isn't probably unlike anyone else's. I always have more projects than time and more projects that I've started than I finish. But I enjoy building kits. This is an old mainline models ON3 kit that I use ON30 trucks on. If you're not familiar with these old kits, they're still available. I wouldn't say anything in O scale is affordable, but there's more models here than I have time for. This is similar to the baggage car, or actually the mail car that ran on the Oahu Railway. It is actually a kit, but it was meant for another railway. My engine gave up the ghost back there. I'm not sure why. I think the battery's been on too long, but you get the idea. The railway would continue across Pearl Harbor Bay here. This is an inlet, and I just have a tank car there to keep me from running off the wrong direction. And then it would continue around the room. And if you notice, I'm using these Rick's Products knob kits, and I painted them in order to make them look more interesting when I'm switching my switches. So I've got torque switch machines, and then the Y running off into the distance here, which isn't completed yet, but I have started the spiral. You can see it coming out from behind the backdrop, and then it would continue down here across Kapakahi Stream and to Waipahu Station and Depot Road. So just for inspiration, I keep, photographs of areas that I'm trying to remember and to keep everything in scale. And then, of course, it goes to a double track there and heads off to the Honolulu again, the direction that we started. So this coral, ironically, I searched all over American Rock and Mineral or Arizona Rock and Mineral and other places, and it turns out coral sand is available locally at Home Depot from Oahu. So I have a lifetime supply. And then some old sugar cane in the back there, and the railroad would continue on all the way back around. And the second deck will ultimately be about eye level here. Well, not quite, about shoulder level at about 60 inches. So don't ask me how I'm going to support it across this 14-foot span yet. It's a work in progress, but it should be fun. So I am down to about 15 minutes or so. And Gert, if you're there, or Marty, if you have anybody with questions, I'm more than happy to spend a minute.
So how long have you been researching the railway?
I was in a bicycle crash in June of 2018, and I couldn't work on the railroad, my railroad, for several months. And in January, I got fed up and tore out the old one and started renovating the room in 2019. So now it has been about a year and several months in the works. Yeah. So this is frustrating for me because I enjoy building models and doing scenery, and I really want it to run well. So it's been a challenge to get to this point for today, but it's been great motivation. So thank you all for joining me on this and giving me the motivation to move forward.
How hard is it to get some of this information from way back?
Well, there's a small group of people that are fascinated with Oahu Railways, and the Honolulu Railway Society is supported by some of these guys. And I would say there's a email mailing list of maybe a dozen people. Many of them are experts in different fields. And one gentleman probably remembers riding the railway, Bob Toha. But I've had an opportunity to meet some of the guys when over on Oahu. And there's also people on the mainland that surprise me now and then, and they pop up with models that are replicas of things that ran here. And so I try to reach out and touch base with them.
Cool. How long does the full charge on that battery last in the shade?
I have the sound turned down. The other day I ran it for probably an hour straight, nonstop. And I've been watching everybody else online, and I forgot to pull the plug on it. So it's probably been sitting for over an hour before I ran it just now. And it probably would be fine. Let me spend a moment and show you some of the pieces of putting together Dead Rail, because if you're fascinated with this idea, bear in mind it's not going to save you any time or money. Maybe I'll turn the camera around so I can show you while I'm talking to you. This whole railroad room, I swear, was designed so I could sit in this couch. Talk about a man cave, right?
Yes.
So there's a gentleman named Neal Stanton who has a kit that allows you to charge the batteries through the rails, which seems to be contradictory to Dead Rail. But my idea is to maybe make a few spots where it would charge, maybe in the staging yard or at sections near the like the water stations, the water towers, that I could keep the rails clean. But obviously you're going to have to keep your wires connected to the locomotive, to the rails. And I haven't experimented with running that alongside with DCC locomotives, and I'm afraid I'm going to have some conflicts there, but I'm not sure. Here is a 2P battery pack from Neal Stanton. These are 1,000 milliamps each, and they would give you a total of about, well, these are 3.3 volts each, I believe. So 3.7. So it gives you about I can't do the math today, 7.4 volts. And then there's a step-up transformer to 12 volts. The other kind of batteries I get from China are what we call PCB protected, so you can't overcharge them. They look kind of like this, and they are relatively inexpensive, maybe $1 or $2 each, because you want to get good ones that aren't going to have problems. I do have some that I was surprised that now I've had these, now bear in mind, for 10 years or so, and I soldered the wires, the leads together, so I had 3 together that give you 11.4 volts, and it gives you a little pack like this. And the idea was, instead of having a plug, that I could drop it in and it would have some ways to connect to, just like a drill battery or something. You just drop it in and it would automatically have connections. But look at this one, has started to swell.
Yeah.
So that's not a good sign. So I don't use this one. I'm afraid if I continue to charge it, it would probably catch on fire. And that is the drawback of doing anything with lithium batteries. Some of these receivers I have here, like this one from NCE, is designed for dead rail. It has a motor control in it, and it's radio frequency type that will work with either that T5000 CVP or this Tam Valley throttle, and you can assign them to different type of frequencies. The other ones, like the ones from Tam Valley, come in little packages and they look like this. And you know, I was a little nervous at first, but you know, you start putting connectors on them and they're kind of plug and play. You don't need to do too much. They're very what's the right word, resilient. I have you know, some SoundTrax decoders that I wire in line with these. So the receiver talks to the throttle, but it still is all DCC. So I can control all of the sounds, all the braking functions, all the momentums and inertia. Recently, this just came out, this Blue Rail Trains. This is a Bluetooth controller, and it doesn't have any sound on board. It actually comes from your cell phone, but you can connect a DCC decoder to it, so you'll have sound on board. And I keep my my old iPhone 10 handy, so I can run my old Blue Rail Trains decoders, which I have one set up. I just don't have many battery packs right now. So that's one of my goals, is to get all of these going. And I do really want to have things run via JMRI. So I have also Wii Throttle on my phone, and I have JMRI set up. Actually, this might be interesting to anybody else that has something like that. This is my bar stools. I wanted this room to feel comfortable, but the laptop just sits hidden away underneath the layout, and I can boot it up, and I have JMRI running along with my NCE power cab and
that is really cool.
6. So it's it is intended to run autonomously at some point on my so-called parade route on the lower level, but I want it to be configured so they don't come and go nonstop. They will be a little more per schedule, so I can run another train and interface with them. So that should be fairly fun.
You answered the NCE question. Someone else wants to know, why would you switch to DCC from battery power?
Why would I? Well, there are still a lot of things with battery that are not so easy to do. I mean, not only charging the batteries, they don't last very long. There's a lot of wiring, and if you're thinking it's less expensive in the long run, you're absolutely wrong. You know, right now, the battery technology, battery on board or dead rail, has a lot of cost, and it's a DIY kind of project. So you need to do it and be willing to jump in. And I have let smoke out of one, so.
Ouch. Are those nickel metal hydride or lithium? These
are lithium ion.
Lithium ion.
Yeah, and these are the ones that you get for like, well, they're from China. I don't know what they're all used for, you know.
And then there was a A more modeling
No, these are
question.
not lithium ion. These are lithium polymer. These are more volatile than lithium ion. Lithium ion is what you use for your house nowadays, I think, right?
Yeah.
These are lithium polymer. So these are like layers, right? So yeah,
So they're kind of
that's why
soft.
it's swelling, yeah.
Then the crowd wants to know, how do you make your palm trees?
Oh, I was afraid you'd never ask. I brought some out here that I had to order these. You can't go into stores around here right now. You have to call and say, do you have any feathers? So they gave me a pink package of feathers. And so, you take out a few, right? And I try to keep them from flying all over my face. And I had them throw in a package of floral stem, which is a floral wire. It looks like this, right? Comes in a package.
Mhm.
And I twist them into a shape like this. I made one just for tonight. It's just a couple of wires I twisted into an unusual shape. It's hard to see with my strange background here. And then once you're kind of satisfied that it's the right size and whatnot, then you start hot gluing all of the feathers on there. And this is an unusual one, but I was hoping to put bunches of coconuts in there. There are no two palm trees that look alike in my mind. I go out and look at the ones in the area, but the ones in the photographs, there's just so many of them. I think that I could just make these all day and everyone would be a little bit different, and no one's going to really look that closely once you have trains running by them. But it's been really fun to do this. And so once I get them glued in place where I'm sort of happy with the way they look, then I'll, let's see if I can find another example. I'll wrap it with the floral tape, and these come in different colors. I just happened to get a brown one because they asked me if I wanted white or brown. And so you wrap it around the wires, and so it forms that palm tree base. And once you're done with that, obviously you can paint it, and so it ends up looking more like this, right? And I do paint them before I wrap the floral stem, because you can have a lot of overspray. I always am wearing nitrile gloves nowadays to work anyway, so I just bring them home and I paint everything before I go back in the house. So I think that this is going to be really fun, but I have about 100 more to make.
I was just about to ask, how many more do you need to make?
I think I'll know when I'm done, or it'll just look, suggestive enough. And they weren't everywhere. They were along the right of way for the most part, because you wouldn't want them out in the middle of a taro field. Obviously, just you only would plant them where you didn't need to maintain it. So.
Any plans for the sugarcane plants and the pineapple plants?
Yes, I don't know if I have any pieces of my old pineapple plants here right now, but I was in, I think, Ace Hardware, and I was looking at a floor mat, one of those welcome mats, and it was about, kind of very small mat, but they were spaced out and they were green and they had the right kind of shape, and so I cut them into long strips. And I glued them in with the hot glue onto my layout, and people were commenting, "Wow, that looks like a plantation, a pineapple plantation." And the only thing I was missing was pineapples. I just said that they were immature.
So what is a taro?
Taro?
Taro.
Taro is a wetland, like a potato. So they grow underground in very wet areas. So.
Cool. Well, Neal.
Yep.
This was really, really fun.
Yeah, it has been. I've been stressing over it all day.
And now it's over, right?
No, it's been fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did we lose Marty, by the way?
Sorry?
Did we lose Marty?
Marty is somewhere in the studio.
Okay. Well, here's to you, Marty. Thank you very much. Just trying to build up my immunity to my corona here.
Thank you, guys. That's the end of me, so Marty will take it from here.